How does an entire generation's favorite food just disappear? In the Soviet Union, it happened all the time. Today, we're uncovering the stories behind 20 classic meals that vanished from dinner tables, from a legendary sweet treat in a can to a strange, fizzy drink made from old bread scraps that was once in every home. 1. Doctor's sausage. Many people are crazy about gourmet sausages, but the most famous sausage in the Soviet Union wasn't made by a chef. To put it mildly, it was designed by doctors. It was called Doktorskaya kolbasa, or doctor's sausage. You see, back in the 1930s, the government wanted a nutritious, protein-rich food to help people recover from the hardships of the time. The result was a pale, pinkish, bologna-style sausage made from a mix of beef, pork, eggs, and milk. It was meant to be healthy and easy to digest. The thing nobody tells you is how important this simple sausage became. It was a food you could trust. In a world of shortages and questionable ingredients, doctor's sausage was a government-approved staple. It was sliced thick and eaten on a piece of black bread for a quick lunch, fried up with eggs for breakfast, or diced into the famous Olivier salad for holiday celebrations. What many overlooked was that its mild, simple flavor was its greatest strength. It wasn't fancy, but it was reliable. Today you can still find sausages called Doktorskaya, but it's just not the same. After the Soviet Union fell, the strict government recipe, known as GOSAT, was abandoned by many producers. They started adding soy, fillers, and different spices. The original doctor-approved sausage, a true taste of a bygone era, has essentially vanished from the dinner table. But if a sausage designed by doctors seems a bit odd, the next item on our list was a fishy staple that swam into every home, whether people liked it or not. 2. Sprats in tomato sauce. In the Soviet Union, the can opener was one of the most important tools in the kitchen, and one of the things it opened most often was a small can of sprats in tomato sauce. You see, these tiny, sardine-like fish were everywhere. They were fished from the Baltic Sea, packed tightly into tins and smothered in a thin, slightly sweet tomato sauce. For many, this was the ultimate convenience food. It was cheap, it was filling, and it lasted forever on the shelf. Not all things are what they seem, however. While it was a food for the masses, it was also a bit of a culinary joke. The fish were small and often mushy, and the sauce was nothing special. Many people were crazy about finding ways to make it taste better. They would mash the sprats on a piece of dark rye bread, mix them with onions, or even use them as a simple pasta sauce. The thing nobody tells you is that this simple can of fish was a true lifesaver for students, workers, and families on a tight budget. It was a quick and easy source of protein. What many overlooked is that the specific taste of those Soviet-era sprats is now gone. Today, you can find all sorts of canned fish, but the particular recipe, the specific type of thin sauce, and even the slightly metallic taste from the old-style cans are a memory. Modern versions are different, often with thicker sauces and better quality fish, but they don't capture that unique, humble taste of the past. From tiny fish in a can, we move to a food that, to put it mildly, required a bit more courage to open, a spreadable snack made from brains. 3. Canned brain pâté. Some foods are an acquired taste, and this next one is definitely at the top of that list. Believe it or not, canned brain pâté was a real thing you could find on Soviet store shelves. You see, in a system where nothing went to waste, every part of an animal was used. This included the brains, which were processed, cooked, and canned into a soft, spreadable pate. It had a unique, very rich flavor and a texture that was, to put it mildly, a little bit mushy. The thing nobody tells you is that this wasn't seen as a bizarre or shocking food at the time. It was just another source of calories and nutrients. It was often spread on bread for a quick snack or served as a simple appetizer. For many, it was just another canned good sitting on the shelf next to the fish and stewed meats. It was particularly valued for being high in fats and certain minerals, making it a surprisingly nutrient-dense option when other foods were scarce. Of course, after the fall of the Soviet Union and the opening of the market to foods from all over the world, brain patty quickly vanished. Modern food safety standards and, frankly, changing tastes made it obsolete. You would be incredibly hard-pressed to find a can of this stuff today. What many overlooked is that its disappearance marked a major shift in the food culture, moving away from the nose-to-tail necessity of the past to the more selective tastes of the present. While brain pate might turn your stomach, the next dish was a childhood staple that was either loved or deeply disliked, a soupy mix of milk and noodles. 4. Milk soup with noodles. Imagine a bowl of hot milk, but instead of cereal, it's filled with fine pasta noodles and a little bit of sugar. This was moloknai soup, or milk soup with noodles, a dish that was a huge part of every Soviet childhood. You see, it was served constantly in kindergartens, school cafeterias, and at home as a quick and easy breakfast or light dinner. It was designed to be simple, warm, and filling for growing kids. The recipe was as basic as it gets. Milk was heated in a pot, a handful of thin vermicelli noodles were added and cooked until soft, and then a spoonful of sugar and a small pat of butter were stirred in. Not all things are what they seem, though, because for something so simple, it created very strong feelings. Some remember it as a comforting sweet treat, while others remember a watery, bland soup with mushy noodles. Many people are crazy about how much they disliked it. The most shocking fact is that this dish has almost completely disappeared from modern tables. Today, with an endless variety of breakfast cereals, yogurts, and other options. The idea of a simple milk and noodle soup seems old-fashioned and unappealing. What many overlooked is that this soup was a perfect reflection of its time. It used basic, affordable ingredients to create a calorie-dense meal for children, serving a practical purpose that is no longer needed in most homes. Speaking of noodles, our next dish took pasta to a level of simplicity that seems almost unbelievable today. A buttery staple that filled bellies on a budget. 5. Vermicelli in butter. Sometimes the simplest meals are the most memorable. In the Soviet Union, when time and ingredients were short, one of the go-to dishes was simply vermicelli in butter. It was exactly what it sounds like. A handful of thin vermicelli noodles were boiled, drained, and then tossed with a generous chunk of butter until every strand was coated. It was the ultimate comfort food, born out of pure necessity. You see, this wasn't a fancy Italian pasta dish. There was no cheese, no sauce, no herbs. The thing nobody tells you is that its plainness was the whole point. It was a way to turn a dry pantry staple into a hot, satisfying meal in under 10 minutes. It was a favorite for kids as an after-school snack and for adults who came home tired after a long day of work. The main flavor was the rich, creamy taste of melted butter, a prized ingredient that made any simple food feel a little more luxurious. What many overlooked is that this dish represented a certain kind of domestic efficiency. It was the perfect example of making something out of almost nothing. Today, with hundreds of pasta sauces available in any store, the idea of eating plain, buttery noodles seems almost strange. Why eat something so simple when you can easily add so much more? Because of this, vermicelli in butter has almost completely vanished, a relic of a time when a little butter was all you needed to make a meal feel special. But plain pasta is one thing. The next item was a wobbly, jiggly meat dish that came from a can and was a common sight on dinner tables across the nation. 6. Canned meat jelly. For many people, the word jelly brings to mind sweet fruit spreads. But in the Soviet Union, there was another kind of jelly, a savory, meaty one that came in a can. This was the industrial version of a traditional dish called holodets or student. The homemade version is a complex dish where meat and bones are boiled for hours until the natural gelatin is released, creating a rich meat jelly when it cools. The canned version, however, was a much simpler affair. You see, canned meat jelly was a mass-produced food item designed for convenience. It was a block of wobbly, semi-transparent gelatin with small pieces of cooked meat suspended inside. To put it mildly, the texture was a unique experience. It was served cold, often sliced and eaten with a piece of bread and some strong mustard or horseradish to cut through the richness. The flavor was distinctly brothy and meaty, but it lacked the depth of the homemade version. The thing nobody tells you is why this product was so common. It was a shelf-stable meat product that didn't require refrigeration, a huge plus for the time. It was a quick and easy appetizer or a light meal. But after the Soviet era, with better access to fresh meat and refrigeration, the appeal of canned meat jelly faded fast. What many overlooked is that its disappearance was a sign of progress, as people no longer needed to rely on such heavily preserved foods. From savory jelly, we turn to a sweet, thick liquid gold that came in a blue and white can and was a treasured treat for every Soviet child. 7. Soviet condensed milk. There are some foods that instantly transport you back to childhood, and for anyone who grew up in the Soviet Union, that food comes in a very specific can. It's blue and white and contains skushenka, or sweetened condensed milk. This wasn't just an ingredient. It was a dessert in its own right. It was a thick, incredibly sweet and creamy milk product that was a source of immense joy. Many people are crazy about the memories associated with this treat. The most shocking fact for some is that kids would often just poke 2 holes in the top of the can and drink the sweet milk straight out. Another popular method was to boil the entire unopened can in water for a few hours. This would caramelize the sugar inside, turning the condensed milk into a thick, golden brown caramel spread called varyonaya skushenka, which was used as a filling for cakes and cookies. The thing nobody tells you is why it was so beloved. In a place with limited access to fancy chocolates and candies, skushenka was an affordable and accessible luxury. It was used to sweeten tea, spread on bread, or just eaten with a spoon. What many overlooked is that the specific taste of that Soviet-era condensed milk is hard to replicate. While you can buy condensed milk today, fans of the original swear that the modern versions just don't have the same rich, creamy texture and flavor. Sweetness was a luxury, but so was fresh fruit. The next item shows how Soviets preserved summer in the most unusual way, by pickling a fruit you'd never expect. 8. Pickled watermelon. Pickling is a common way to preserve vegetables like cucumbers and cabbage. But what about fruit? In the Soviet Union, housewives took preservation to a whole new level with one of the most surprising pickled items imaginable: watermelon. Yes, you heard that right. Come the end of summer, large glass jars would be filled with chunks of watermelon, rind and all, and preserved in a salty, spiced brine. You see, this was a brilliant solution to a common problem. Watermelons have a short season, and this was a way to enjoy their flavor long into the cold winter months. But not all things are what they seem. The pickling process completely transformed the fruit. The texture became softer, almost like a cooked squash. And the flavor was a mind-bending mix of sweet, salty, and sour. The brine was often flavored with dill, garlic, and peppercorns, adding a savory kick. The watermelon would also become slightly fizzy from the fermentation. The most shocking fact is how popular this was. It was a beloved zakuska, a type of appetizer served with strong drinks and a common sight on holiday tables. Today, however, pickled watermelon has become a true rarity. It's a time-consuming process, and with fresh fruit available year-round in most supermarkets, the need to preserve watermelon in this way has all but vanished. It remains a forgotten taste of a resourceful past. Pickling wasn't just for fruit. The next dish combined a canned vegetable with a creamy sauce that became the signature flavor of an entire era. 9. Canned peas with mayo. If one food combination could define the flavor of Soviet celebratory cuisine, it would be canned green peas mixed with mayonnaise. It sounds incredibly simple, and it was. But this humble duo was the foundation of countless salads and appetizers. You see, fresh vegetables were often hard to come by, especially in winter, but canned goods and mayonnaise were almost always available. The most famous use of this combination was in the legendary Olivier salad, a potato salad with peas, carrots, pickles, and some kind of meat, all bound together with a huge amount of mayonnaise. Canned green peas were also mixed with mayo and hard-boiled eggs to make a simple spread for bread, or just served as a basic side dish. The peas were soft and starchy, and the mayonnaise was rich and tangy, creating a flavor profile that is deeply nostalgic for millions. The thing nobody tells you is that the mayonnaise itself was different. Soviet mayonnaise was a thick, rich sauce that was a key part of the national diet. Today, while people still eat salads with peas and mayo, the reliance on the canned version has faded. Frozen peas, or even fresh peas, are now readily available, and their crisp texture and sweet flavor are very different from the soft, mushy canned peas of the past. That specific taste of canned peas swimming in Soviet-style mayo is a flavor that has largely vanished from the modern table. If peas and mayo sound basic, the next salad took cheap canned goods and turned them into a bizarre seafood imposter that everyone was crazy about. 10. Imitation crab salad. In the later years of the Soviet Union, a new and exciting food product appeared in stores: imitation crab sticks. These weren't actual crab meat. They were made from surimi, a paste of processed white fish, which was flavored and colored to look like crab legs. To put it mildly, it was a sensation. Real crab was an impossible luxury for almost everyone, so these crab sticks offered a taste of the exotic and were seen as quite sophisticated. Almost immediately, a classic recipe was born: the imitation crab stick salad. You see, everyone had their own version, but the basic recipe was the same. The crab sticks were chopped up and mixed with canned corn, hard-boiled eggs, and sometimes rice or cucumbers. And, of course, the whole thing was bound together with a generous amount of mayonnaise. It was bright, colorful, and had a unique sweet and savory flavor. Many people are crazy about this salad, and it became an absolute must-have for any special occasion, from New Year's Eve to birthday parties. It was a sign of a good host. While you can still find imitation crab sticks today, the salad itself is no longer the height of fashion. What many overlooked is that its popularity was tied to a specific time of scarcity. Now, with so many other options available, it's seen as a bit dated and has largely been replaced by other, more modern dishes. Fake crab was a treat, but the next item was a true delicacy from the sea, a preserved fish that was a common sight on simple, open-faced sandwiches. 11. Bread with balek. While most everyday fish came from a can, there was a special type of fish that was reserved for celebrations or for those with good connections. This was balek, a term for the salted and dried soft flesh from the back of large, valuable fish like sturgeon. This wasn't a casual snack. It was a high-end delicacy. The fish was cured in a way that gave it a firm, almost buttery texture and a rich, concentrated flavor. You see, balek was too precious to be cooked or mixed into a salad. The thing nobody tells you is that it was almost always served in the simplest way possible, on a buterbrod, the Russian word for an open-faced sandwich. A thin slice of white bread would be spread with a layer of butter, and then a paper-thin, almost translucent slice of balek would be carefully placed on top. That was it. It was a perfect combination of simple and luxurious. What many overlooked is that the specific type of sturgeon used for the best balek became incredibly rare due to overfishing. This made true, high-quality balek even more expensive and harder to find. Today, while other types of cured fish are available, the legendary sturgeon balek that graced Soviet holiday tables has become a ghost. It's a vanished food that represents a lost world of simple, elegant delicacies. Expensive cured fish was for special occasions. But what about the fish people ate day to day? The next canned good came from the country's mighty rivers. 12. Canned river fish. The Soviet Union was a land of vast rivers, and those rivers were full of fish like bream, carp, and roach. It was only natural that these fish would become a major source of food. While some were eaten fresh, a huge amount was canned for distribution across the country. Canned river fish in oil or tomato sauce was a common sight in every food store. It was cheap, plentiful, and provided a valuable source of protein. However, not all things are what they seem. Unlike pricey sprats or tuna, these river fish came with a major drawback. They were incredibly bony. The canning process softened the bones, but it didn't make them disappear. Eating a can of bream in oil required a lot of patience, as you had to carefully pick out dozens of tiny, sharp bones from every bite. To put it mildly, it was a hassle. Fish bones were a challenge, but the next dish was a smooth, creamy porridge that could be a sweet breakfast or a savory side, a food that defined childhood for millions. 13. Semolina pudding. For generations of Soviet children, the word kasha was a part of daily life, and one of the most common types was manная kasha, or semolina pudding. This was a smooth, thick porridge made by boiling semolina wheat grains in milk. It was the quintessential breakfast food served in every home, school, and daycare center across the country. It was cheap, easy to make, and very filling. The thing nobody tells you is the controversial reputation this dish had. When made well, it was creamy and comforting, often served with a pat of butter, a sprinkle of sugar, or a spoonful of jam. But when made poorly, which often happened in mass catering environments, it was a nightmare. It was famous for developing lumps, known as komochki, which were dreaded by children everywhere. The battle to get kids to finish their lumpy semolina is a shared memory for millions. Semolina was for kids, but the next item was a universal necessity that looked like butter, but often was not. A spread born from constant shortages. 14. Rationed butter spreads. In the Soviet economy, butter was a precious commodity. It was often in short supply, or deficit, and what was available could be expensive. To solve this problem, food scientists created a variety of butter-like spreads. The most famous of these was called buterbrodnoe maslo, which translates to sandwich butter. It was a blend of real butter mixed with other vegetable fats and sometimes milk powder to stretch the expensive main ingredient. You see, this wasn't quite butter, and it wasn't quite margarine. It was something in between. It had a softer texture than real butter and a slightly different, less creamy flavor. There were also various forms of pure margarine and other combined fats, known as kombinirovaný žír. Many people are crazy about how they used to hunt for real butter, checking the percentage of milk fat listed on the packaging to make sure they were getting the good stuff. Spreading fat on bread was one thing, but what about vegetables? The next canned good took a humble root and preserved it in a way you rarely see today. 15. Canned beets in oil. Beets are a cornerstone of Eastern European cuisine, famous as the main ingredient in borscht. But in the Soviet Union, you would also find them in another, much simpler form: canned beets in oil. This was a very basic product. The beets were cooked, peeled, sliced, or grated, and then packed into glass jars with vegetable oil and a little bit of salt and vinegar. It was a way to preserve the beet harvest for the long winter months. You see, this was a ready-to-eat product that could be used in a variety of ways. It could be served as a simple side dish known as a garner, alongside a main course of meat or potatoes. It was also a convenient shortcut for making salads. Instead of having to boil and peel beets from scratch, a housewife could just open a jar. It was the base for the popular vinaigrette salad, a mix of beets, potatoes, carrots, and pickles. From preserved vegetables, we moved to a drink that was made from another kitchen staple, a fizzy, sour beverage brewed from stale bread. 16. Kvass from bread scraps. Kvass is a famous fermented drink that is often called the Russian equivalent of soda. In Soviet times, you could buy it from large barrels on the street during the summer. But the thing nobody tells you is that many families made their own kvass at home, and they made it from something that would otherwise be thrown away: old, stale rye bread. This was the ultimate example of Soviet resourcefulness. The process was simple. Dried crusts of rye bread were soaked in boiled water. Sugar and a little bit of yeast were added, and the mixture was left to ferment for a day or two in a warm place. The result was a cloudy, tangy, and slightly fizzy beverage that was incredibly refreshing on a hot day. Each family had its own little secrets, sometimes adding raisins, mint, or berries for extra flavor. Bread wasn't the only thing foraged for flavor. The next item came from the forest, a canned delicacy that brought a taste of the wild to the city. 17. Canned milk mushrooms. Mushroom hunting is a passionate national pastime in Russia, and this was especially true during the Soviet era. A successful trip to the forest meant a bounty of fresh, flavorful mushrooms that could be used to supplement the family's diet. While many mushrooms were eaten fresh or dried, a huge portion was preserved for the winter. One of the most prized types for preserving was the milk mushroom. You see, milk mushrooms are a type of mushroom that must be soaked for a long time to remove a bitter taste before they can be salted or pickled. The preservation process was a major undertaking involving days of soaking, boiling, and packing the mushrooms into jars with salt, dill, and garlic. The result was a firm, almost crunchy mushroom with a wonderfully tangy and savory flavor. They were a treasured appetizer, or zakuska, especially during the long winter holidays. Foraged mushrooms were a treat, but the next food was a daily staple, a type of cheese that was the backbone of countless simple meals and desserts. 18. Soviet cheese curds. The dairy section of a Soviet store looked very different from what we see today. One of the most important items was tvorog, which is often translated as cottage cheese or farmer's cheese, but it's really its own unique thing. Soviet-era tvorog was a fresh, soft curd cheese that was often quite dry and crumbly. It was sold by weight, scooped out of a large container and wrapped in paper. The thing nobody tells you is just how versatile this product was. It was a true workhorse in the kitchen. It could be eaten simply with a spoonful of sour cream and sugar for a quick breakfast. It was mixed with herbs and garlic to make a savory spread for bread. Most famously, it was the star ingredient in serniki, which are small, thick pancakes made from tvorog, eggs, and a little flour, pan-fried until golden and served with jam or sour cream. Fresh cheese was common, but preserving vegetables took on an intense form with our next item, a pungent snack that could ward off more than just scary creatures. 19. Pickled garlic heads. Garlic is a key flavoring in countless dishes, but in the Soviet Union, it was also eaten as a dish in its own right, in the form of whole pickled garlic heads. This wasn't just a couple of cloves in a jar of pickles. We are talking about the entire bulb of garlic with its papery skin still on, preserved in a tangy vinegar brine. This was a common and beloved snack, especially in the southern regions of the USSR. The pickling process worked a kind of magic on the garlic. To put it mildly, it completely transformed it. The sharp, pungent bite of raw garlic was mellowed into something much milder, with a satisfying crunch and a sour, savory flavor. The cloves could be peeled off the head one by one and eaten as a snack. They were a very popular zakuska, an appetizer served alongside strong drinks to cleanse the palate. While pickled garlic was a sharp bite, our final dish was a hearty, soupy meal in a can, a humble grain that provided warmth on the coldest nights. 20. Canned pearl barley soup. Rasolnik is a classic and beloved soup in Russian cuisine. It's a hearty, sour soup whose key ingredients are pearl barley and pickles. The thing nobody tells you is that this soup, which normally takes a while to cook from scratch, was also available in a convenient, ready-to-eat form, a can. Canned rasolnik was a staple of the Soviet food industry. You see, this was the ultimate quick meal for a working person. After a long shift, you could come home, open a can, heat it up, and have a hot, filling soup in minutes. The canned version contained all the classic elements: a savory broth, soft-cooked pearl barley, potatoes, carrots, and of course, the signature chopped pickles that gave the soup its name. It wasn't as good as homemade, but it was fast and reliable. What many overlooked is that these kinds of canned soups were a huge part of the Soviet public food system, or общепит. They were designed to feed the masses efficiently. But as home cooking became more accessible and people had more time and better ingredients, the appeal of canned soup declined. Why eat the watery, preserved version when you can make a much more flavorful soup from scratch? Because of this, canned rasolnik, once a familiar sight, has now completely vanished from the shelves. Vanished from the shelves. Vanished from the shelves. Vanished from the shelves.